School trip vanishing. The case that shook America. The yellow school bus pulled into the parking lot of Yellowstone National Park at exactly 2:47 p.m. on September 15, 2019. What should have been the highlight of Jefferson High School's senior class trip was about to become every parent's worst nightmare. Among the 28 excited teenagers stepping off that bus was 17-year-old Michael Chen, an honor student with dreams of studying environmental science. Within 3 hours he would vanish without a trace, sparking one of the most extensive search operations in National Park Service history. The initial moments seemed so ordinary. Students gathered around their chaperones, checking their phones for the last time before venturing into areas with limited cell service. Michael was captured in what would become the final photograph of him, standing near the bus, adjusting his blue backpack, smiling at something his best friend Jake had just said. The timestamp on that photo reads 2:52 p.m. By 6 p.m., that same backpack would be found abandoned near a cliff edge, with no sign of its owner. This is the story of how a routine educational trip turned into a mystery that would consume investigators, devastate a community, and leave questions that remain unanswered to this day. It's a case that highlights the dangerous intersection of teenage curiosity, wilderness hazards, and the terrifying reality that someone can simply disappear, even when surrounded by classmates and teachers. The search for Michael Chen would involve over 200 personnel, including park rangers, FBI agents, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from across the country. Helicopters would scan thousands of acres of rugged terrain. Ground teams would follow every trail, check every cave, and examine every possible hiding spot. Yet despite all these efforts, despite the technology and expertise brought to bear, Michael seemed to have vanished into thin air. What makes this case particularly haunting is how quickly everything went wrong. One moment, Michael was with his classmates, excited about exploring one of America's most famous national parks. The next he was gone, leaving behind only questions, and a community struggling to understand how such a thing could happen. To understand how Michael Chen disappeared, we must first understand the unique circumstances that made this tragedy possible. Jefferson High School, located in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, had been organizing annual senior trips to Yellowstone for over 15 years. The program was considered one of the school's crown jewels, combining education with adventure in a way that created lasting memories for students. The 2019 trip was particularly special because it marked the program's anniversary. The school had secured additional funding to extend the trip from 3 to 5 days, allowing students to explore more of the park's diverse ecosystems. 28 seniors had qualified for the trip based on their academic performance and behavior records. Michael Chen was among the top students selected, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while actively participating in the school's environmental club. The timing of the trip, scheduled for mid-September, was chosen deliberately. By this time of year, the summer crowds had thinned, making it easier for the group to navigate popular attractions. The weather was typically stable, with comfortable daytime temperatures and cool evenings perfect for camping under the stars. However, this timing also meant that daylight hours were shorter, and weather conditions could change rapidly. The group was supervised by 3 teachers: Mr. David Richardson, a 45-year-old geography teacher who had led the trip for the past 8 years; Ms. Sarah Martinez, a 32-year-old biology teacher making her first Yellowstone trip; and Mr. James Wilson, a 38-year-old physical education teacher who also served as the school's outdoor activities coordinator. Additionally, 2 parent volunteers had joined the expedition: Mrs. Helen Brooks, whose daughter Emma was part of the group, and Mr. Tom Sullivan, a local hiking enthusiast and father of student Kevin Sullivan. The planned itinerary was ambitious but manageable. Day 1 included arrival and setup at the Grant Village campground, followed by an evening presentation about park safety and wildlife. Day 2 featured visits to the Grand Prismatic Spring and Old Faithful, with educational stops focusing on geothermal activity. Day 3 was dedicated to hiking portions of the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, with multiple viewpoints planned to showcase the park's geological diversity. It was during this third day that everything went wrong. The group had successfully completed their morning hike to Artist Point, where they spent nearly 2 hours studying the geological formations and taking photographs. The afternoon plan called for a visit to Uncle Tom's Trail, a more challenging hike that would take them closer to the lower falls of the Yellowstone River. The weather that day was initially favorable. Morning temperatures were in the mid-50s, with clear skies and light winds. However, meteorological records show that a weather system was moving in from the west, bringing with it the potential for afternoon thunderstorms and rapidly dropping temperatures. The park's weather service had issued a general advisory, but nothing that would have warranted canceling outdoor activities. Michael's behavior that day was described by his classmates as typical. He was engaged during the morning educational sessions, asking questions about the geological processes that had formed the canyon. He seemed particularly interested in the wildlife they encountered, photographing elk and bison with the camera his parents had given him specifically for the trip. His teachers noted nothing unusual about his demeanor or actions. The group dynamics were also important to consider. Like most teenage groups, informal cliques had formed within the larger party. Michael was part of a smaller group of academically focused students who often stuck together during free time. His closest friends on the trip were Jake Morrison, Emma Brooks, and Lisa Wang. This group was known for being responsible and following rules, which made Michael's disappearance all the more shocking. The park itself presented unique challenges. Yellowstone covers over 2.2 million acres of wilderness, with terrain ranging from geothermal areas to dense forests to alpine peaks. The area where Michael disappeared was particularly rugged, featuring steep cliffs, hidden ravines, and thick vegetation that could easily conceal someone who had fallen or become lost. Wildlife in the area included bears, wolves, and mountain lions, adding another layer of concern to any search operation. Cell phone coverage in the park was notoriously spotty, with many areas having no signal at all. This meant that if someone became separated from the group, they couldn't simply call for help. The park's communication systems relied primarily on radio networks used by rangers and emergency personnel. All these factors combined to create what investigators would later describe as a perfect storm of circumstances. A challenging environment, limited communication options, changing weather conditions, and the inherent unpredictability of teenage behavior all contributed to creating the conditions that would allow Michael Chen to vanish without a trace. Disappearance. The day that changed everything, September 17, 2019, started like any other day of the trip. Michael Chen woke up in his tent at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled wake-up call. His tentmate, Jake Morrison, later recalled that Michael seemed excited about the day's activities, particularly the planned hike to see the lower falls up close. Michael had been looking forward to this specific hike since the beginning of the bay trip, having researched the trail extensively beforehand. The morning routine proceeded normally. Students gathered for breakfast at 7 a.m., where Michael was observed eating heartily and joking with his friends. He was wearing his signature blue backpack, a sturdy hiking pack that his parents had bought him for his 17th birthday. Inside, he carried water bottles, snacks, his camera, a small first aid kit, and a journal where he had been documenting the trip's highlights. At 8:15 a.m., the group attended the morning safety briefing conducted by Mr. Richardson. The teacher reviewed the day's itinerary, emphasized the importance of staying with the group, and reminded everyone about the park's wildlife safety protocols. Michael was actively participating in the discussion, asking questions about the geological formations they would see and the photography opportunities available. The bus departed Grant Village at 9 a.m., arriving at the Uncle Tom's Trail parking area at 9:45 a.m. The initial portion of the hike was relatively easy, following a paved path that was suitable for visitors of all ages. The group moved as a unit, with teachers spaced throughout to ensure no one fell behind. Michael was positioned roughly in the middle of the group, walking alongside Jake and Emma. The first major stop was at the Upper Falls viewpoint at 10:30 a.m. Here, the group spent approximately 45 minutes while Ms. Martinez explained the geological processes that had created the waterfall. Michael was particularly engaged, taking numerous photographs and asking detailed questions about the erosion patterns visible in the rock face. This was the last time several students clearly remembered seeing him participating in group activities. The hike continued toward the more challenging section of the trail, which involved a series of steep switchbacks and metal staircases descending toward the lower falls. It was during this transition, around 11:15 a.m., that the group naturally began to spread out. Some students moved ahead eagerly, while others took their time navigating the steeper terrain. According to multiple witness accounts, Michael was still with the main group when they reached the first major switchback. Emma Brooks specifically remembered him stopping to retie his hiking boots at this point, commenting that they were slightly too loose. Jake Morrison was walking ahead but looked back to see Michael about 30 feet behind, seeming to struggle slightly with the steep descent. The trail at this point was narrow and challenging, with steep drop-offs on one side and rocky walls on the other. Park regulations required hikers to stay on designated paths, but the terrain made it tempting to step off the trail for better photographic angles or to avoid congestion. Several students later admitted to briefly leaving the path, though they insisted they had immediately returned. At approximately 11:45 a.m., the group reached a scenic overlook about halfway down the trail. This was designated as a rest stop where students could drink water, eat snacks, and take photographs. Mr. Wilson conducted an informal head count, noting that all 28 students were present. However, several students later stated that the count may have been inaccurate due to the overlook's layout, which included multiple viewing areas separated by trees and rocks. Michael was vividly present at this stop, as confirmed by a photograph taken by Lisa Wang at 11:47 a.m. In the image, he can be seen standing near the railing, pointing toward the falls while explaining something to Emma. His blue backpack is clearly visible, and he appears relaxed and engaged with his surroundings. The group resumed hiking at 12 p.m., beginning the most challenging portion of the descent. This section of the trail was particularly treacherous, with wet rocks from spray off the falls making the metal walkways slippery. The teachers had positioned themselves strategically. Mr. Richardson at the front, Ms. Martinez in the middle, and Mr. Wilson bringing up the rear. It was during this final descent that the group became more scattered. The narrow trail and varying hiking speeds naturally caused students to spread out over several hundred yards. Some of the more athletic students, including Kevin Sullivan and Mark Thompson, had moved well ahead of the main group. Others, particularly those who were nervous about the steep drops, took their time and fell behind. Jake Morrison later testified that he last saw Michael at approximately 12:15 p.m., about 200 yards from the bottom of the trail. Michael had stopped to take a photograph of the falls from a particularly scenic angle. Jake called out to him to hurry up, as they were falling behind the main group. Michael waved in acknowledgement and appeared to be preparing to catch up. However, when the group reassembled at the bottom of the trail at 12:30 p.m., Michael was nowhere to be found. Initially, the teachers assumed he was still making his way down the trail with the slower hikers. It wasn't until Mr. Wilson conducted a thorough head count at 12:45 p.m. that they realized Michael was missing. The immediate response was swift but would prove to be crucial in the investigation. Mr. Richardson immediately radioed the park's emergency services while Miss Martinez began organizing the students. Several classmates, including Jake and Emma, volunteered to hike back up the trail to look for Michael. However, park protocol required that they wait for official search teams. At 1 p.m., the first park ranger arrived at the scene. Ranger Patricia Davis, a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, began coordinating the initial search efforts. She questioned the teachers and students about Michael's last known location and sent 2 rangers back up the trail to retrace his possible path. The search initially focused on the assumption that Michael had simply fallen behind or become confused about the trail route. However, when the rangers reached the scenic overlook where Michael had last been seen, they found something that immediately escalated the situation. Michael's blue backpack, sitting on a rock outcropping about 15 feet off the main trail. The backpack was discovered at 1:35 p.m. by Ranger Mark Stevens. It was sitting upright and appeared to have been placed there deliberately rather than dropped. All of Michael's belongings were still inside: his water bottles, snacks, camera, first aid kit, and journal. The camera's memory card contained dozens of photos from the trip, with the final image timestamped at 12:18 p.m. This photograph showed a close-up view of the lower falls, taken from an angle that suggested Michael had indeed left the main trail to get a better shot. The discovery of the backpack fundamentally changed the nature of the search. If Michael had simply become lost or injured on the trail, he would have kept his pack with him. The fact that it had been abandoned, particularly in a location that required him to leave the designated path, suggested something more serious had occurred. Park officials immediately expanded the search area and called in additional resources. The local sheriff's department was notified, and plans were made to bring in specialized search and rescue teams. The area around the backpack was cordoned off as a potential crime scene, though investigators stressed that they were not ruling out any possibilities. Meanwhile, the rest of the school group was transported back to their campground, where they were questioned individually about their interactions with Michael and any unusual behavior they might have observed. The students were visibly shaken, with several requiring counseling support as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The weather conditions that had been favorable in the morning began to deteriorate around 2 p.m. The predicted storm system arrived earlier than expected, bringing with it heavy rain, strong winds, and rapidly dropping temperatures. These conditions not only made the search more dangerous, but also threatened to wash away any potential evidence or tracks that might have led to Michael's location. By 3 p.m., over 50 personnel were involved in the search operation, including park rangers, local law enforcement, and volunteer search and rescue teams. Helicopters were requested but grounded due to the weather conditions. Search dogs were brought in and immediately detected Michael's scent around the backpack location. But the trail seemed to end abruptly at the edge of a steep ravine. The ravine where Michael's scent disappeared was particularly treacherous, dropping nearly 300 feet to a rocky creek bed below. The area was thick with vegetation and had numerous hidden caves and overhangs where someone could become trapped or concealed. However, initial visual searches of the ravine revealed no signs of Michael or any disturbance that might indicate a fall. As darkness approached, the search teams were forced to suspend operations until morning. The decision was agonizing for everyone involved, but the dangerous terrain and worsening weather conditions made it too risky to continue. The area around the backpack was secured with floodlights and guards to preserve any evidence that might be discovered when the search resumed. The first 24 hours after Michael's disappearance were critical, and investigators knew that their chances of finding him alive diminished significantly with each passing hour. The discovery of his abandoned backpack raised more questions than answers, and the search teams prepared for what they feared might be a recovery operation rather than a rescue. That night, as rain pounded the search area and temperatures dropped into the 30s, Michael Chen's fate remained a mystery. His classmates huddled in their tents, struggling to comprehend how their friend had simply vanished. His teachers questioned every decision they had made, wondering if they could have done something differently to prevent the tragedy. The investigation was just beginning, but already the case was taking on the characteristics that would make it one of the most perplexing disappearances in National Park Service history. The abandoned backpack, the abrupt end to the scent trail, and the complete absence of any witnesses to Michael's final moments created a puzzle that would challenge investigators for years to come. As news of the disappearance began to spread beyond the park, Michael's parents were frantically driving through the night from Phoenix to Yellowstone, desperate for any information about their son's fate. The media was beginning to take notice, and what had started as a routine school trip was about to become a national story that would captivate the country and forever change how schools approached outdoor education programs. The search for Michael Chen had begun in earnest, but the circumstances of his disappearance suggested that finding answers would be far more complicated than anyone initially imagined. The wilderness that had seemed so beautiful and educational just hours earlier had suddenly become a vast, unforgiving landscape that had somehow swallowed a promising young man without a trace. Dawn broke over Yellowstone National Park on September 18th, with a massive search operation already underway. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind clear skies but treacherous conditions on the ground. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and much of the search area was covered with a thin layer of frost that made the already dangerous terrain even more hazardous. Incident Commander Sarah Mitchell, a 20-year veteran of search and rescue operations, had arrived at 5 a.m. to coordinate what was rapidly becoming one of the largest search efforts in the park's history. By sunrise, over 150 personnel were involved in the operation, including specialized teams from across the region. The search strategy was comprehensive and methodical. The area had been divided into grid sections, with each team responsible for thoroughly covering their assigned zone. Ground teams were equipped with GPS units to ensure complete coverage, while helicopter crews prepared to resume aerial searches as soon as weather conditions permitted. The discovery of Michael's backpack had provided investigators with their first concrete clue, but it had also raised disturbing questions. Forensic specialists had arrived during the night to examine the pack and its contents for any evidence that might explain how it had ended up in that location. The backpack itself showed no signs of damage or struggle, and all of Michael's belongings remained untouched. The camera found in the backpack proved to be particularly valuable. Digital forensics experts were able to recover not only the final photograph Michael had taken, but also detailed timestamp data that helped establish a precise timeline of his movements. The last photo, taken at 12:18 p.m., showed the lower falls from an angle that required Michael to have climbed over the safety railing and positioned himself on a narrow rock ledge. This discovery led to a crucial breakthrough in understanding Michael's final known movements. The photograph was taken from a position that was both dangerous and technically prohibited, as it required visitors to leave the designated trail area. However, the image quality and composition suggested that Michael had not simply stumbled into this location accidentally, but had deliberately sought out this specific vantage point. Search teams immediately focused their efforts on the area around this photo location. The rock ledge where Michael had stood was carefully examined for any signs of what might have happened next. The surface was still damp from the previous night's rain, but investigators were able to identify scuff marks on the rocks that appeared consistent with someone wearing hiking boots. The terrain below the photo location was particularly treacherous. A steep slope covered with loose rocks and sparse vegetation led down to the ravine where Michael's scent had been detected. The drop was not immediately fatal, but a fall in this area could easily result in serious injury that would prevent someone from calling for help or climbing back up. Search and rescue teams equipped with specialized climbing gear began a systematic exploration of the ravine. The area was honeycombed with small caves and overhangs, created by centuries of water erosion. Each potential hiding spot had to be carefully investigated, a process that was both time-consuming and dangerous. At 10:30 a.m., searchers made their first significant discovery since finding the backpack. About 200 feet down the ravine, caught on a thorn bush, was a small piece of blue fabric that appeared to match Michael's jacket. The fabric was fresh, showing no signs of weathering, and contained what appeared to be a small bloodstain. This finding immediately escalated the search from a missing person case to a potential rescue operation. The discovery suggested that Michael had indeed fallen into the ravine, but the small amount of blood and the fact that the fabric was found relatively high up on the slope gave investigators hope that he might have survived the initial fall. Additional resources were immediately deployed to the ravine area. Technical rescue teams with specialized equipment were brought in to access the most difficult areas. Medical personnel were placed on standby, and a helicopter equipped with a rescue basket was positioned nearby in case Michael was found alive but injured. The psychological impact of the fabric discovery was significant for Michael's classmates and teachers, who had been following the search's progress from their campground. The possibility that their friend might be injured and trapped somewhere in the wilderness added urgency to their prayers and hopes for his safe recovery. Meanwhile, investigators were also exploring other possibilities. While the physical evidence suggested an accidental fall, they could not rule out other scenarios. Interviews with Michael's classmates continued, focusing on his state of mind, any recent stressors in his life, and his relationships with other students. These interviews revealed a picture of a well-adjusted teenager who had been genuinely excited about the trip and his future plans. Michael had recently been accepted to several universities and was particularly enthusiastic about studying environmental science. His friends described him as careful and responsible, making his apparent decision to leave the safety of the designated trail seem out of character. Jake Morrison, Michael's best friend and tentmate, provided perhaps the most detailed account of Michael's final hours. He described how Michael had been particularly focused on photography during the trip, often taking extra time to capture the perfect shot. Jake recalled that Michael had mentioned wanting to get a unique photograph of the lower falls, something that would stand out from the typical tourist pictures. This information helped investigators understand why Michael might have left the trail. His passion for photography, combined with typical teenage confidence and perhaps a momentary lapse in judgment, could have led him to take risks he normally wouldn't consider. The quality of his final photograph suggested he had achieved his goal of capturing a unique image, but at what cost? The search of the ravine continued throughout the day, with teams working in shifts to maintain safety while covering as much ground as possible. The terrain was so difficult that progress was measured in yards rather than miles, and each potential hiding spot required careful investigation. As afternoon approached, the search teams were joined by specialized cadaver dogs, a development that no one wanted to acknowledge but everyone understood was necessary. The dogs were trained to detect human remains and would be crucial if the search transitioned from rescue to recovery. The weather remained favorable for the search, with clear skies and moderate temperatures. However, investigators knew that time was working against them. Even if Michael had survived the initial fall, exposure to the elements in the wilderness would quickly become life-threatening. The search area was also expanded beyond the immediate ravine. Teams were deployed to check all possible routes Michael might have taken if he had somehow survived the fall and attempted to find his way back to safety. This included remote areas of the park that would be difficult for an injured person to reach but might represent logical destinations for someone who had become disoriented. Local media coverage of the search was intensifying, with news crews arriving from across the region. The story of a missing honor student from a school trip was capturing public attention. And tips were beginning to pour in from people who claimed to have seen Michael or had information about his disappearance. Most of these tips proved to be false alarms, but each one had to be investigated thoroughly. The volume of calls and emails was becoming overwhelming, requiring additional personnel to manage the influx of information while ensuring that legitimate leads weren't missed. The park's communication systems were also being pushed to their limits. The massive search operation required constant coordination between ground teams, helicopter crews, and command centers. Radio traffic was heavy, and backup communication systems had to be activated to ensure that all search teams remained in contact. As evening approached, the search teams prepared for their second night of operations. Floodlights were set up in key areas to allow for limited nighttime searching, while teams with night vision equipment were positioned to continue the search in the most promising locations. The psychological toll of the search was beginning to show on all involved. Michael's classmates were struggling with guilt and fear, wondering if they could have done something to prevent the disappearance. His teachers were facing intense scrutiny about their supervision of the group and their decision to continue the hike despite the challenging conditions. The search operation had already consumed enormous resources and was showing no signs of immediate resolution. However, the discovery of the fabric gave everyone involved a reason to continue hoping that Michael might still be found alive. The search for Michael Chen had become a race against time, with hundreds of people working around the clock to bring him home safely. As darkness fell over Yellowstone for the second time since Michael's disappearance, the search teams settled in for another long night. The wilderness that had seemed so peaceful and educational just days earlier had become the setting for a desperate struggle to save a young man's life and bring closure to a community that refused to give up hope. Breakthrough and heartbreak. The discovery, the third day of the search, began with a breakthrough that would change everything. At 6:45 a.m. on September 19th, a search dog named Rex, working with handler officer Jennifer Walsh, picked up a strong scent trail in a previously unexplored section of the ravine. The trail led to a small cave system that had been hidden by fallen trees and dense vegetation. The cave entrance was barely visible, requiring searchers to crawl through a narrow opening that would have been easy to miss during previous searches. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber that showed clear signs of recent human presence. Footprints in the soft earth, disturbed rocks, and what appeared to be a makeshift shelter suggested that someone had been there recently. But it was what searchers found in the deepest part of the cave that confirmed their worst fears. Michael Chen's body was discovered at 7:20 a.m., positioned in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to stay warm. He was curled up against the cave wall, still wearing his hiking clothes, with his jacket wrapped tightly around him. The discovery sent shockwaves through the search operation. After 3 days of hoping for a rescue, the mission had suddenly become a recovery operation. The news spread quickly through the search teams, and many of the hardened rescue workers who had been searching tirelessly for Michael were visibly emotional. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the park's chief medical officer, was the first medical professional to examine Michael's body. Her preliminary assessment suggested that he had died from exposure to the cold, though a complete autopsy would be necessary to determine the exact cause of death. There were no obvious signs of trauma that would indicate a fatal fall, raising questions about exactly how Michael had ended up in the cave. The scene inside the cave told a story of survival and tragedy. Michael had clearly been alive when he reached the cave, and evidence suggested he had survived for at least several hours after his disappearance. He had attempted to create a shelter using rocks and debris, and had apparently tried to start a fire, though the damp conditions in the cave had made this impossible. Most heartbreaking was the discovery of Michael's journal, which contained entries made after his disappearance. In shaky handwriting, Michael had documented his fall from the photo location, his journey through the ravine, and his discovery of the cave. The entries revealed that he had been injured in the fall but was initially optimistic about his chances of survival. The journal entries painted a picture of a brave young man who had tried everything he could think of to stay alive and find his way back to safety. He had rationed his water, tried to signal for help, and even attempted to climb out of the ravine multiple times. However, his injuries and the challenging terrain had made escape impossible. The final entry in Michael's journal was dated September 17th, the day of his disappearance, and was written in the evening hours. In it, he expressed his love for his family and friends, his regret about leaving the designated trail, and his hope that his story might prevent other young people from making similar mistakes. The discovery of Michael's body required a complex recovery operation. The narrow cave entrance and difficult terrain made it impossible to bring his body out quickly or easily. Specialized equipment had to be brought in, and the recovery process took several hours to complete safely. Meanwhile, the devastating news had to be communicated to Michael's classmates and teachers, who were still holding on to hope for his safe return. The school's crisis counselors, who had been standing by since the first day of the search, were immediately deployed to help the students process their grief and trauma. The most difficult task fell to Incident Commander Sarah Mitchell, who had to personally inform Michael's parents of their son's fate. David and Linda Chen had been maintaining a vigil at the park since their arrival, refusing to leave until their son was found. The news of Michael's death was devastating, but they expressed gratitude to the hundreds of people who had searched tirelessly for their son. The investigation into Michael's death continued even after his body was recovered. Forensic specialists examined the cave scene thoroughly, documenting every detail that might help explain exactly what had happened. The preliminary findings suggested that Michael had fallen from the photo location, been injured but not fatally, and had somehow made his way to the cave where he had survived for several hours before succumbing to exposure. The autopsy results, released several days later, confirmed that Michael had died from hypothermia. He had sustained minor injuries in his fall, including a sprained ankle and various cuts and bruises, but none of these injuries were life-threatening. The cause of death was exposure to the cold temperatures and his inability to maintain body heat in the damp cave environment. The timeline established by investigators suggested that Michael had died sometime during the night of September 17th, probably within 12 to 18 hours of his disappearance. This meant that he had been alive during much of the initial search effort, a realization that was particularly difficult for the search teams who had been working so close to his location. The discovery of Michael's body also raised questions about the search strategy that had been employed. The cave where he was found was in an area that had been searched, but the hidden entrance had been overlooked during the initial sweeps. This led to a comprehensive review of search protocols and procedures to ensure that similar oversights wouldn't occur in future operations. The emotional impact of Michael's death extended far beyond his immediate family and friends. The story had captured national attention, and people across the country had been following the search efforts. The news of his death prompted an outpouring of grief and support from strangers who had been hoping for his safe return. The National Park Service announced a comprehensive review of safety protocols for school groups visiting the park. The ease with which Michael had been able to leave the designated trail and access dangerous areas raised concerns about whether current safety measures were adequate to protect young visitors. Jefferson High School also faced difficult questions about their supervision of the trip and their preparation of students for the hazards they might encounter. The school's outdoor education program, which had been a source of pride for the institution, was immediately suspended pending a thorough investigation. The discovery of Michael's body marked the end of one of the most intensive search operations in Yellowstone's history. Over 300 people had participated in the search effort, covering thousands of acres of wilderness terrain. The operation had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and had demonstrated both the dedication of search and rescue personnel and the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. For Michael's family, the recovery of his body brought a measure of closure, but also deepened their grief. They had held on to hope that their son might somehow survive his ordeal, and learning that he had died alone in a cave was almost unbearable. However, they found some comfort in reading his journal entries, which showed that he had fought bravely for survival and had thought of them until the end. The death of Michael Chen had transformed from a missing person case into a tragedy that would have lasting implications for wilderness education and park safety. His story would serve as a sobering reminder of how quickly outdoor recreation could turn deadly, and how even the most prepared and responsible young people could find themselves in life-threatening situations. As Michael's body was transported from the park for the final time, the wilderness that had been the scene of such intensive search efforts returned to its natural quiet. But the impact of his death would continue to resonate with everyone who had been touched by his story, serving as a permanent reminder of the price that can be paid when nature's beauty masks its inherent dangers. The aftermath, ripple effects of tragedy. The death of Michael Chen sent shockwaves through multiple communities, each grappling with their own sense of loss and responsibility. The immediate aftermath was marked by grief, anger, and a desperate search for answers that went far beyond the physical search that had consumed the previous 3 days. Jefferson High School faced the monumental task of helping Michael's classmates process their trauma while also dealing with intense media scrutiny and potential legal liability. The 27 students who had returned from the trip were struggling with survivor's guilt, many blaming themselves for not staying closer to Michael or for not noticing his absence sooner. Principal Robert Martinez called an emergency assembly on the morning of September 20th, the day after Michael's body was discovered. The gymnasium was packed with students, teachers, and parents, all searching for some way to make sense of the tragedy. Crisis counselors were positioned throughout the audience, ready to provide support to anyone who needed it. The principal's words were carefully chosen, acknowledging the profound loss while also trying to provide some measure of comfort to the grieving school community. He spoke about Michael's academic achievements, his kindness to fellow students, and his bright future that had been cut tragically short. However, his words felt inadequate in the face of such devastating loss. Jake Morrison, Michael's best friend and tentmate, was particularly devastated by the outcome. He had been the last person to see Michael alive, and he couldn't stop replaying their final interaction in his mind. Jake had called out to Michael to hurry up, but had then continued down the trail without waiting to ensure his friend was following. The weight of this decision was crushing him. Emma Brooks, whose mother had been one of the parent chaperones, was dealing with her own complex emotions. She had been part of Michael's close friend group, and had taken several of the photos that documented their final day together. Looking at these images now was almost unbearable, as they captured Michael's excitement and joy just hours before his death. The parent community was also struggling with the implications of the tragedy. Many had sent their own children on previous Jefferson High School trips to Yellowstone, and the realization that such a disaster could occur despite experienced supervision was terrifying. Parents began questioning whether they could trust the school with their children's safety in the future. The 3 teachers who had supervised the trip were facing their own professional and personal crises. Mr. David Richardson, the veteran trip leader, was particularly affected by the outcome. He had led similar trips for 8 years without incident, and Michael's death felt like a personal failure that he wasn't sure he could overcome. Miss Sarah Martinez, the biology teacher who had been making her first trip to Yellowstone, was questioning whether she was suited for outdoor education. She had been so excited about sharing her love of nature with her students, but now she couldn't imagine ever leading another wilderness trip. Mr. James Wilson, the physical education teacher, was dealing with questions about whether the group's supervision had been adequate. As the teacher responsible for bringing up the rear of the hiking group, he was particularly focused on whether he could have done something differently to prevent Michael's disappearance. The school district immediately launched a comprehensive investigation into the trip's planning and execution. Safety protocols were reviewed, supervision ratios were analyzed, and every decision made during the trip was scrutinized. The investigation would take months to complete, but initial findings suggested that the school had followed established safety procedures. However, the tragedy also highlighted gaps in those procedures. The ease with which Michael had been able to leave the designated trail and access dangerous areas without being immediately noticed raised questions about whether current supervision methods were adequate for wilderness environments. The National Park Service was conducting its own investigation into the incident, focusing on whether park safety measures and visitor education programs were sufficient to prevent similar tragedies. The discovery that Michael had been able to climb over safety railings and access prohibited areas without being detected by park personnel was particularly concerning. Yellowstone officials announced plans to review trail safety measures, improve signage about dangers, and potentially modify access to certain high-risk areas. The park's educational programs for school groups were also being evaluated to ensure they adequately communicated the serious risks associated with leaving designated trails. The legal implications of Michael's death were also beginning to emerge. The Chen family had hired an attorney to investigate potential liability on the part of the school district, the National Park Service, and the trip organizers. While they emphasized that their primary concern was preventing similar tragedies, they were also exploring whether negligence had contributed to their son's death. The media coverage of the tragedy was intense and often sensationalized. News outlets across the country picked up the story, with many focusing on the dramatic aspects of the search rather than the more complex questions about wilderness safety and supervision. This coverage added another layer of stress for everyone involved, as they found themselves thrust into the public spotlight during their time of grief. Social media amplified the emotional impact of the story, with thousands of people sharing memories of Michael and expressing their condolences to his family. However, it also became a platform for uninformed speculation and criticism of the school and park officials, adding to the emotional burden carried by those directly affected by the tragedy. The broader outdoor education community was also grappling with the implications of Michael's death. Programs across the country began reviewing their own safety protocols and procedures, recognizing that the tragedy at Yellowstone could have happened anywhere. Professional organizations held emergency meetings to discuss best practices and potential improvements to student supervision in wilderness settings. The incident also sparked broader conversations about the balance between educational opportunities and safety in outdoor programs. Some argued that the risks inherent in wilderness education were too great, while others maintained that properly supervised outdoor experiences were essential for student development and environmental education. Michael's parents, David and Linda Chen, were dealing with their own overwhelming grief while also trying to ensure that their son's death would have meaning. They began speaking publicly about the importance of wilderness safety education and the need for better supervision of student groups in national parks. The family established the Michael Chen Memorial Foundation, dedicated to promoting outdoor safety education and supporting search and rescue operations in national parks. The foundation's mission was to prevent future tragedies while still encouraging young people to appreciate and explore the natural world. The community of Phoenix, where Michael's family lived, also rallied around the Chen family. Vigils were held, fundraisers were organized, and the family received thousands of letters and cards from people who had been touched by their son's story. This outpouring of support provided some comfort during their darkest hours. The investigation into Michael's death continued for months, with officials examining every aspect of the trip and the search operation. The final report, released 6 months later, concluded that while no single factor was responsible for the tragedy, a combination of circumstances had created conditions that made Michael's death possible. The report made dozens of recommendations for improving wilderness safety education, enhancing supervision protocols, and modifying park safety measures. These recommendations would influence policies and procedures for years to come, serving as Michael's lasting legacy to future generations of students and outdoor enthusiasts. As the immediate crisis began to subside, the affected community started the long process of healing and recovery. Michael's death had fundamentally changed how they thought about outdoor education, wilderness safety, and the precious nature of life itself. While the pain of his loss would never fully disappear, his story would continue to serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of safety, preparation, and vigilance in the wilderness. The tragedy at Yellowstone had ended one promising young life, but it had also created a legacy that would protect countless others in the years to come. Michael Chen's name would be forever associated with wilderness safety education, ensuring that his death would not be in vain and that future generations of students would be better prepared for the challenges and dangers of outdoor exploration. Investigation revelations: hidden truths emerged 6 months after Michael Chen's death. A comprehensive investigation revealed disturbing details that had been overlooked during the initial search and rescue operation. The final report, compiled by a joint task force including the National Park Service, the FBI, and independent safety experts, painted a troubling picture of systemic failures that had contributed to the tragedy. The investigation uncovered that Michael's death was not simply the result of a teenage mistake or an unfortunate accident. Instead, it was the culmination of multiple failures in safety protocols, supervision procedures, and emergency response systems that had created a perfect storm of conditions leading to his demise. One of the most significant revelations involved the adequacy of supervision during the fateful hike. The investigation found that the teacher-to-student ratio, while meeting state requirements for school trips, was insufficient for the challenging terrain and hazardous conditions present at Uncle Tom's Trail. With 28 students spread across a difficult hiking trail, the 3 supervising teachers were unable to maintain visual contact with all students at all times. The report also revealed that Mr. James Wilson, the teacher assigned to bring up the rear of the group, had been dealing with his own health issues during the trip. Wilson had been suffering from altitude sickness, which affected his ability to maintain the necessary pace to keep the group together. This information had not been disclosed during the initial investigation, as Wilson feared it would end his career. Even more troubling was the discovery that Michael had not been the first student to leave the designated trail during the trip. The investigation found that several students had briefly ventured off the path earlier in the day to take photographs, but these incidents had gone unnoticed by the supervising adults. This pattern of risk-taking behavior had been escalating throughout the trip, with students becoming increasingly comfortable with bending safety rules. The investigation also revealed serious flaws in the park's emergency response procedures. When Michael was first reported missing, valuable time was lost due to confusion about which agency had jurisdiction over the search operation. The initial response was delayed by nearly 45 minutes while park officials, local law enforcement, and school district personnel argued about who was responsible for coordinating the search. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Michael's cell phone, which had been assumed to be non-functional due to poor coverage in the area, had actually been receiving signals intermittently. Cell phone tower records showed that Michael's phone had connected to the network several times during the hours after his disappearance, suggesting that he had been trying to call for help. The investigation team was able to recover deleted voicemails and text messages from Michael's phone that painted a harrowing picture of his final hours. In a series of increasingly desperate messages, Michael had documented his fall, his injuries, and his growing realization that he might not survive the night. One voicemail, recorded at 3:47 a.m. on September 18th, was particularly heartbreaking. In a weak, barely audible voice, Michael could be heard saying goodbye to his parents and apologizing for the worry he had caused them. The message also contained crucial information about his location, describing landmarks that could have helped search teams find him much sooner. The failure to detect these cellular communications was attributed to outdated emergency response protocols that did not account for modern technology. The search teams had been using traditional methods of communication tracking, unaware that Michael's phone was still functional and transmitting location data. The investigation also uncovered troubling information about the school's preparation for the trip. While the school had conducted safety briefings and provided students with emergency contact information, the content of these briefings was found to be inadequate for the specific hazards present at Yellowstone. Students had not been properly educated about the dangers of leaving designated trails, the risks of hypothermia, or the importance of staying with the group at all times. Internal school documents revealed that several teachers had expressed concerns about the trip's safety in the weeks leading up to the departure. These concerns had been documented in emails and meeting minutes, but had not been addressed by the school administration. The investigation found that the school's risk assessment for the trip had been superficial and had not adequately considered the specific challenges posed by the Yellowstone environment. The investigation also revealed that the National Park Service had been aware of safety issues at Uncle Tom's Trail for several years prior to Michael's death. Internal memos showed that park officials had discussed the need for improved safety barriers and better supervision of visitor groups. But budget constraints and bureaucratic delays had prevented these improvements from being implemented. Most shocking was the discovery that there had been previous incidents at the same location where Michael disappeared. The investigation found records of 3 other cases in the past decade where visitors had left the designated trail and become lost or injured in the same general area. While none of these incidents had resulted in fatalities, they had highlighted the need for improved safety measures that had never been implemented. The investigation also revealed problems with the search operation itself. While the search teams had worked tirelessly to find Michael, the operation had been hampered by poor coordination between different agencies and inadequate familiarity with the terrain. The cave where Michael's body was eventually found had been searched twice during the first 2 days, but the hidden entrance had been missed both times due to inadequate search protocols. The report found that the search operation had been further complicated by the large number of volunteers who had joined the effort. While their intentions were good, many of these volunteers lacked the training and experience necessary for wilderness search operations. Their presence had actually hindered the search in some areas, as experienced personnel had to spend time managing and supervising the volunteers rather than focusing on the search itself. The investigation also uncovered significant communication failures during the search operation. Radio communications between search teams had been sporadic and often unclear, leading to confusion about which areas had been searched and which teams were responsible for specific zones. This lack of coordination had resulted in some areas being searched multiple times while others were overlooked entirely. The report's findings led to immediate changes in policies and procedures at multiple levels. The National Park Service implemented new safety measures at high-risk locations, including improved safety barriers and enhanced visitor education programs. Jefferson High School suspended its outdoor education program indefinitely and implemented new requirements for student supervision ratios. The FBI created new protocols for coordinating multi-agency search operations in wilderness areas. The investigation's findings also led to the development of new technology specifically designed to prevent similar tragedies. Emergency beacon systems were installed at high-risk locations throughout the park, and new cell phone tower installations were planned to improve coverage in remote areas. Advanced tracking systems were developed to help locate missing persons more quickly in wilderness environments. For the families affected by the tragedy, the investigation's revelations brought both closure and renewed pain. Learning that Michael had tried to call for help and that his phone had been transmitting location data was devastating for his parents. They couldn't help but wonder if their son might have survived if the emergency response systems had been more effective. However, the investigation also provided them with detailed information about Michael's final hours that helped them understand what had happened. The journal entries and phone messages showed that their son had remained brave and resourceful until the end, fighting for survival and thinking of his family even in his darkest moments. The legal aftermath of the investigation was complex and lengthy. Multiple lawsuits were filed against the school district, the National Park Service, and various equipment manufacturers. While some cases were settled out of court, others continued for years, serving as a constant reminder of the tragedy for all involved. The investigation's final report made 47 specific recommendations for improving wilderness safety, emergency response procedures, and student supervision protocols. These recommendations were adopted by organizations across the country and became the foundation for new safety standards that would protect countless future visitors to America's national parks. The death of Michael Chen had revealed systemic failures that went far beyond a single tragic incident. The investigation showed that his death was preventable, the result of multiple missed opportunities and inadequate safety measures. This knowledge was painful for everyone involved, but it also provided the motivation needed to make meaningful changes that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. As the investigation concluded, the various communities affected by Michael's death began the long process of implementing the recommended changes. New safety protocols were put in place, emergency response systems were upgraded, and educational programs were enhanced to better prepare students for wilderness experiences. The transformation was comprehensive and lasting. Within 2 years of the investigation's completion, wilderness safety programs across the country had been fundamentally changed. The Michael Chen Protocol became standard practice for school trip safety, requiring enhanced supervision ratios, improved emergency communication systems, and comprehensive risk assessments for all outdoor activities. The investigation had also revealed the incredible dedication and professionalism of the search and rescue personnel who had worked tirelessly to find Michael. Despite the systemic failures that had contributed to the tragedy, the individual responders had performed heroically, working around the clock in dangerous conditions to locate a missing teenager they had never met. The legacy of the investigation extended beyond safety improvements to influence how society thinks about risk management and emergency preparedness. The comprehensive nature of the report set new standards for incident investigation and demonstrated the importance of examining not just immediate causes, but also systemic factors that contribute to tragedies. For Michael's classmates, now adults with families of their own, the investigation's findings provided context for their traumatic experience. Understanding that their friend's death was the result of multiple system failures rather than simple bad luck helped them process their grief and move forward with their lives. The teachers who had supervised the trip were profoundly affected by the investigation's revelations. Learning that there had been previous incidents at the same location, and that safety concerns had been documented but not addressed, was devastating. However, they also found some measure of redemption in knowing that their experience had led to meaningful changes that would protect future students. The investigation into Michael Chen's death had uncovered truths that were difficult to accept, but necessary to acknowledge. The comprehensive nature of the report and the thoroughness of the investigation process had provided answers to the questions that had haunted everyone involved. While these answers were often painful, they also provided the foundation for the systematic changes that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. The transformation of wilderness safety protocols, emergency response procedures, and student supervision standards represented Michael's true legacy. His death had not been meaningless. It had served as a catalyst for changes that would save countless lives in the years to come. The investigation had ensured that his story would continue to protect future generations of students and outdoor enthusiasts. As the investigation concluded and the various communities moved forward, they carried with them the knowledge that tragedy could be prevented through proper preparation, adequate supervision, and effective emergency response. The death of Michael Chen had taught them that the price of inadequate safety measures was too high to pay, and that the responsibility for protecting young lives in the wilderness was a sacred trust that required constant vigilance and continuous improvement. The investigation had revealed that Michael's death was not just a personal tragedy, but a systemic failure that had implications far beyond a single school trip. The comprehensive nature of the report and the wide-ranging recommendations it contained had fundamentally changed how America approaches wilderness safety and emergency preparedness. The ripple effects of Michael Chen's death and the subsequent investigation continued to spread throughout American society for years after the tragedy. The case became a watershed moment for wilderness safety, educational policy, and emergency response protocols, fundamentally changing how the nation approaches outdoor recreation and student supervision. The National Park Service underwent the most dramatic transformation in its history. The agency implemented the Chen Safety Initiative, a comprehensive program that included new visitor education requirements, ENHANCED trail monitoring systems, and improved emergency response capabilities. Every national park was required to conduct thorough risk assessments of their most popular attractions and implement specific safety measures for high-risk areas. The most visible changes occurred at Yellowstone itself. Uncle Tom's Trail, where Michael had disappeared, was completely redesigned with new safety barriers, improved lighting, and enhanced communication systems. Warning signs were installed in multiple languages, and mandatory safety briefings were implemented for all organized groups visiting the area. The trail that had once been freely accessible to all visitors now required permits for groups larger than 10 people. The park also invested heavily in new technology designed to prevent similar tragedies. GPS tracking systems were installed throughout high-risk areas. Motion sensors were deployed to detect visitors who strayed from designated paths, and emergency communication towers were erected to ensure cell phone coverage in previously dead zones. The cost of these improvements exceeded $15 million. But park officials considered them a necessary investment in visitor safety. The educational system experienced equally dramatic changes. The American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association worked together to develop new standards for outdoor education programs. The Michael Chen standards became mandatory for all schools receiving federal funding, requiring enhanced supervision ratios, comprehensive safety training for teachers, and detailed emergency response plans for all outdoor activities. Schools across the country were forced to reevaluate their outdoor education programs. Many institutions temporarily suspended wilderness trips while they upgraded their safety protocols and retrained their staff. The cost of meeting the new standards was substantial, but the alternative, risking another tragedy like Michael's death, was unacceptable to most educators and parents. Jefferson High School, where Michael had been a student, underwent a complete transformation. The school hired a full-time safety coordinator, implemented new risk assessment procedures, and established partnerships with professional outdoor education organizations. The annual Yellowstone trip was resumed after a 2-year hiatus, but with significantly enhanced safety measures and a reduced number of participants. The legal consequences of the investigation were far-reaching and expensive. The Chen family's lawsuit against the school district resulted in a $12 million settlement, one of the largest ever awarded in a school safety case. Additional lawsuits by other families affected by the tragedy resulted in settlements totaling over $20 million. These financial consequences sent a clear message to educational institutions: about the importance of adequate safety measures. The National Park Service also faced significant legal liability, settling claims for $8 million and agreeing to implement comprehensive safety improvements across all park properties. The agency's insurance costs increased dramatically, forcing budget reallocations that affected park operations for years to come. The technology industry responded to the tragedy by developing new safety products specifically designed for wilderness. Education. GPS tracking devices became standard equipment for school trips, emergency beacon systems were miniaturized for student use, and communication apps were developed to maintain contact, even in areas with poor cell coverage. These innovations created an entirely new market segment focused on educational safety. The psychological impact of Michael's death extended far beyond his immediate community. Mental health professionals noted an increase in anxiety among parents whose children participated in outdoor education programs. Support groups were formed for families affected by wilderness tragedies, and new counseling protocols were developed to help communities cope with similar losses. The media coverage of the case also had lasting effects on public perception of wilderness safety. Documentaries, books, and news articles about Michael's disappearance raised awareness about the risks associated with outdoor recreation. While some critics argued that this coverage created unnecessary fear, supporters contended that it promoted healthy respect for wilderness dangers. The search and rescue community used the lessons learned from Michael's case to improve their own operations. New training programs were developed, equipment was upgraded, and coordination protocols were enhanced. The Professional Association of Search and Rescue Organizations created the Chen Memorial Training Program, which became the gold standard for wilderness search operations. The investigation also led to improved coordination between different agencies involved in emergency response. The FBI, National Park Service, local law enforcement, and search and rescue organizations developed new protocols for working together during wilderness emergencies. His tragedy transformed from a personal loss into a national wake-up call that fundamentally changed how America approaches wilderness safety and emergency preparedness. The young man who had dreamed of studying environmental science and protecting the natural world he loved had inadvertently become its most effective advocate for safety. His death had sparked changes that would protect countless future visitors to America's wilderness areas, ensuring that his passion for the outdoors would continue to inspire others while keeping them safe. The comprehensive investigation into his death revealed that tragedies are rarely the result of a single failure, but rather the culmination of multiple systemic problems. By addressing these underlying issues, the various institutions affected by Michael's death had created a safer environment for everyone who follows in his footsteps. The legal, regulatory, and technological changes implemented in response to his death represented one of the most comprehensive safety initiatives in American history. From the halls of Congress to the trails of Yellowstone, Michael's story had influenced policies and procedures that would protect millions of people for years to come. Perhaps most importantly, his death had demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when communities were willing to confront difficult truths and take responsibility for their failures. The transformation of wilderness safety protocols showed that even the most devastating tragedies could lead to positive outcomes when people were committed to learning from their mistakes and implementing necessary improvements. The ongoing impact of Michael's story continued to ripple through American society, touching lives in ways that would never be fully measured or understood. Every student who returned safely from a wilderness trip, every family that remained whole because of improved safety measures, every emergency responder who successfully located a missing person, all of these positive outcomes could be traced back to the lessons learned from Michael's death. His legacy served as a permanent reminder that the responsibility for protecting young lives in the wilderness was a sacred trust that required constant attention and continuous improvement. The comprehensive nature of the response to his death had shown that meaningful safety improvements were possible when institutions accepted responsibility for their failures and committed to doing better. The story of Michael Chen had evolved from a personal tragedy into a national testament to the power of learning from loss and the importance of never giving up on the goal of protecting those we care about. His death had taught America that the price of inadequate safety measures was too high to pay, and that the duty to protect students and outdoor enthusiasts was a responsibility that could never be taken lightly. As new generations of students continue to explore America's wilderness areas, they do so with the protection of safety measures that exist because of Michael's sacrifice. His story ensures that his death was not in vain and that his passion for the natural world continues to inspire others while keeping them safe. The enduring message of Michael Chen's story is clear. In our pursuit of education, adventure, and connection with the natural world, we must never forget that safety is not just a set of rules to follow, but a moral obligation to protect the precious lives entrusted to our care. His legacy reminds us that every precaution taken, every safety measure implemented, and every emergency response improved represents a life potentially saved and a family kept whole. The wilderness that claimed Michael's life continues to call to new generations of young people, just as it called to him. But now, thanks to the changes sparked by his death, they can answer that call with the protection of comprehensive safety measures that honor his memory and ensure that his story will continue to save lives for years to come. In the end, Michael Chen's brief life and tragic death had accomplished something that most people never achieve in a full lifetime. He had made the world a safer place for everyone who came after him. His story would continue to echo through the canyons and valleys of America's wilderness areas, a permanent reminder that in our quest to explore and understand the natural world, we must never forget our responsibility to protect those who share that quest with us. The death of Michael Chen had taught America that wilderness safety was not just about following rules or implementing procedures. It was about honoring the sacred trust that exists between those who lead and those who follow, between those who plan and those who participate, between those who teach and those who learn. His legacy ensures that this trust will never again be taken lightly, and that future generations will benefit from the painful lessons learned from his loss. Note: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. His tragedy transformed from a personal loss into a national wake-up call that fundamentally changed how America approaches wilderness safety and emergency preparedness. The young man who had dreamed of studying environmental science and protecting the natural world he loved had inadvertently become its most effective advocate for safety. His death had sparked changes that would protect countless future visitors to America's wilderness areas, ensuring that his passion for the outdoors would continue to inspire others while keeping them safe. The comprehensive investigation into his death revealed that tragedies are rarely the result of a single failure, but rather the culmination of multiple systemic problems. By addressing these underlying issues, the various institutions affected by Michael's death had created a safer environment for everyone who follows in his footsteps. The legal, regulatory, and technological changes implemented in response to his death represented one of the most comprehensive safety initiatives in American history. From the halls of Congress to the trails of Yellowstone, Michael's story had influenced policies and procedures that would protect millions of people for years to come. Perhaps most importantly, his death had demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when communities were willing to confront difficult truths and take responsibility for their failures. The transformation of wilderness safety protocols showed that even the most devastating tragedies could lead to positive outcomes when people were committed to learning from their mistakes and implementing necessary improvements. The ongoing impact of Michael's story continued to ripple through American society, touching lives in ways that would never be fully measured or understood. Every student who returned safely from a wilderness trip, every family that remained whole because of improved safety measures, every emergency responder who successfully located a missing person, all of these positive outcomes could be traced back to the lessons learned from Michael's death. His legacy served as a permanent reminder that the responsibility for protecting young lives in the wilderness was a sacred trust that required constant attention and continuous improvement. The comprehensive nature of the response to his death had shown that meaningful safety improvements were possible when institutions accepted responsibility for their failures and committed to doing better. The story of Michael Chen had evolved from a personal tragedy into a national testament to the power of learning from loss and the importance of never giving up on the goal of protecting those we care about. His death had taught America that the price of inadequate safety measures was too high to pay, and that the duty to protect students and outdoor enthusiasts was a responsibility that could never be taken lightly. As new generations of students continue to explore America's wilderness areas, they do so with the protection of safety measures that exist because of Michael's sacrifice. His story ensures that his death was not in vain and that his passion for the natural world continues to inspire others while keeping them safe. The enduring message of Michael Chen's story is clear. In our pursuit of education, adventure, and connection with the natural world, we must never forget that safety is not just a set of rules to follow, but a moral obligation to protect the precious lives entrusted to our care. His legacy reminds us that every precaution taken, every safety measure implemented, and every emergency response improved represents a life potentially saved and a family kept whole. The wilderness that claimed Michael's life continues to call to new generations of young people, just as it called to him. But now, thanks to the changes sparked by his death, they can answer that call with the protection of comprehensive safety measures that honor his memory and ensure that his story will continue to save lives for years to come. In the end, Michael Chen's brief life and tragic death had accomplished something that most people never achieve in a full lifetime. He had made the world a safer place for everyone who came after him. His story would continue to echo through the canyons and valleys of America's wilderness areas, a permanent reminder that in our quest to explore and understand the natural world, we must never forget our responsibility to protect those who share that quest with us. The death of Michael Chen had taught America that wilderness safety was not just about following rules or implementing procedures. It was about honoring the sacred trust that exists between those who lead and those who follow, between those who plan and those who participate, between those who teach and those who learn. His legacy ensures that this trust will never again be taken lightly, and that future generations will benefit from the painful lessons learned from his loss. Note: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.